Hello friends, welcome back. So today we will discuss about constructor in Java. So let's start with understanding what is constructor. So basically in Java, a constructor is a block of code similar to a method that's called when an instance of an object is created. So we don't need to explicitly call a constructor. It will get automatically called when an object is created. So let's go through some of the characteristics of a constructor. A constructor doesn't have a return type, not even void. So constructor will not return any value. The name of the constructor must be same as the name of the class. So that's one of the important characteristic of constructor, that the name of the constructor should be class name only. Unlike methods, constructors are not considered member of a class. So unlike method, constructors are not considered members of a class because uh, unlike methods, constructors are not being called by object. It will be automatically called when an object is created. So that's why it is not considered member of a class. A constructor is called automatically when a new instance of an object is created, as I said earlier. A constructor cannot be abstract, static, final, native, strict FP or synchronized. So most of the times in interview, it's been called that can we declare a constructor as static? So no, a constructor cannot be abstract or final or native or static. Okay, so we should make a point that it should not be any of these. A constructor can be overloaded. So again, one sometimes the question is asked, can we overload a constructor? So yes, you can overload a constructor. Constructors cannot be private. Again, this could be one of the interview question. So your answer should be constructor cannot be private. An interface cannot have the constructor. That's again one of the important point to note, that an interface cannot have the constructor. So let's understand the types of constructor. There are two major types, like default constructor and parameterized constructor. So when we say the constructor is default constructor, when it is not having any or parameters in it, means it is not accepting any parameter. It's just a constructor without any parameters, then it will be called as default constructor. But if any of the constructor you are declaring with the parameters, those will be called as parameterized constructor. So let's understand about default constructor. So a constructor is called default constructor when it doesn't have any parameter. As I said earlier, when it doesn't have any parameter, it will be called as default constructor. There is one rule about default constructor. So what is that rule? If there is no constructor in a class, compiler automatically creates a default constructor. So whenever you declare a class, you will not always declare a constructor. You will not always write a constructor, but by default, compiler will explicitly add the constructor, like shown in the below diagram. So what is the purpose of default constructor? So let's understand some more facts about parameterized constructor. So a constructor which has a specific number of parameters is called a parameterized constructor. This we already discussed in our earlier slide. Why we should use the parameterized constructor? So that could be one of the interview question again. The parameterized constructor is used to provide different values to different objects. However, you can provide the same values also. So yeah, you can definitely provide same values, but whenever there is a need to provide different values as per the object, you can use parameterized constructor. We can have any number of parameters in the constructor. Okay, so you can specify any number of parameters in the constructor. So let's understand one example of parameterized constructor. What I have done in this example, I have just modified the earlier default constructor example with adding two parameters so that it will become parameterized constructor. So here in the constructor test class, what I have done, I have created one parameterized constructor which accepts two parameters, age and string name. And similarly, I have created one more object. I have created object with passing the arguments because ours is parameterized constructor. And after each object creation, I'm just printing the values which are stored there in the variables in name and age. So if I run the code now, and if you observe, it will print now for the object. When once object is created, first object is created, the values will be the ram and age will be 30 as we passed. And when the second object is created, the values will be for the second objects. So that's how the parameterized constructor will work. It will basically assign the uh, values which we are passing as a parameter when we are creating the object. Constructor overloading. So this is again one of the interview question wherein sometimes ask in an interview that whether we can overload the constructor. So yes, in Java, a constructor is just like a method, but without return type. So obviously it can also be overloaded like Java methods. So constructor overloading in Java is a technique of having more than one constructor with different parameter list. It's same like having different methods with different parameters. They are arranged in a way that each constructor performs a different task. Obviously, if you are writing constructor with different parameter list, they are meant to be perform different tasks. Okay, they are differentiated by the compiler by the number of parameters in the list and their types. So basically, whenever we need to call the parameterized method, or let's say overloaded method, we need to call with providing the sequence of a parameters as per method written. Okay, so similarly, if you need to call the parameterized constructor, or let's say overloaded constructor, it will be called when you are creating an object of that similar pattern. So let's understand this more with one of the example. What I'm doing, I'm just updating the existing class with having the constructor overloaded. So let's go to the program. So what I have done in this constructor test class, I have created we already have this parameterized constructor in our earlier program. I have just modified it little bit. I have changed the sequence of the parameters. So earlier we were accepting int age and string name. For second constructor, what I have done, um, I have kept string parameter as first and integer as a second. So we know that for overloading, the sequence of the parameters is different. Then also we say that this method is overloaded. So now this become a overloaded constructor, these two. And the third constructor, what I have done, I have just increased the number of parameters. So I have added one more parameter here. So now if you run, and I have also kept the sysout println statement in each constructor so that we will print the values once the object is created. Okay, so now if you observe this, I have created the object matching for each constructor. This will match for first constructor, that is starting with parameter int age and string name. So int value and the name. Then second object will match to the second constructor, so that will accept string as a first argument and then integer as a second argument. And third will accept the string, integer and string. So this third I haven't used in any print statement, so I have just provided a blank value here. So if I run the code now, So it will print all three statements with three different parameters as we provided, Ram, Lakhan and Bharat. So that's how the constructor overloading can be done. And yes, constructor can be overloaded in a Java. This is again one of the interview question. Can a constructor be overridden in Java? So to the answer to this question is constructor overriding is never possible in Java. So why it is never possible? Because we all know that how what is overriding basically. Overriding is nothing but the parent class method uh, should be implemented in a different way with the in a subclass basically or in a child class, but the method name should be same and the parameter list or should be same. But when we say constructor, we all know that constructor although looks like a method, but there is a condition for constructor that the constructor name should be the class name. So when we say for overriding, the parent method name and the child method name should be same, but it could not happen in the way in the form of constructor, right? Because the parent class name will be the constructor name for parent class, and the child class name will be the constructor name for child class. So it is not going to happen that the parent class name will be there as a constructor for child class. Okay, even if you write the parent class or create a parent class, try to create a parent class constructor in a child class, compiler will treat it as a uh, another method, not the constructor. And as it treats it as a method, so you definitely need to write down the return type, because for method return type is must. That is um, another prerequisite for method, but for constructor there is no return type. So that's why we can easily say that constructor overriding is never possible in Java. Another topic in constructor is nothing but constructor chaining. So what is constructor chaining? Constructor chaining is the process of calling one constructor of a class from another constructor of the same class or another class using the current object of the class. So constructor chaining could happen in the same class or from the another class as well. There are two ways to do constructor chaining. One will be within same class, or we can say using this keyword, and another will be from base class, or we can say using super keyword. Okay. uh, there is one note. Let's understand what is the note. In Java, it is invalid and illegal to call the constructor directly by name. Okay, so we cannot call constructor by directly constructor by its name directly. Just like in method, we can do it. Like one method can be called with the method name from another method, but it's not possible for constructor. So we have to use either of these two keywords, either this or super, to call the constructor. So that's another important note to keep in mind. So how constructor calling happens, like constructor calling from another constructor. So we already discussed that there are two ways, either using this keyword or by using super keyword. So if you need to call constructor from another constructor, you can use this keyword. This keyword will be used for calling the constructor from the same class, and super keyword will be used to call the constructor from the parent class. So super will be in a relationship with parent and child, that is inheritance. So there is one more note. In the same constructor block, we cannot use this and super simultaneously. Okay, so that's important. You cannot use this and super keywords simultaneously. Similarly, you cannot use two these keywords or two super keywords, because then it will start giving an error that this or super keyword should be the first line in the code. So if once you are writing first this, then you cannot write second this, because that is becoming second line. So it will say that you need to write it first, but you already written first. So that's how it is. So you can either call only one this or super in the constructor. So let's understand the constructor chaining using this keyword, or let's say within the same class, how the constructor chaining uh, can be achieved. So what I have done here in the existing code, I have commented out these two objects and only kept one object. So once we create this object, this there are parameters integer and string, so it will call the constructor star with the same parameter sequence, that is integer and name. In the same parameter, once it comes to this constructor, it will find this keyword first. This keyword should always be written first line in the constructor, so that is one of the rule. So once it finds this keyword, what it means, it's supposed to refer the another constructor with these parameters. So the matching parameter will be string and integer, so it will come to this constructor, the second one. Then this the flow is, it will come here and it will find the call for third constructor like string, integer and string, so it will come here. So what will be the output here? So the first line will be Bharat and 31, because what it will be printed from this third constructor. Then after it is execution, I believe it will print Lakhan and this one, and finally the Ram and the other his age will be printed. So let's run the code once. Yeah, so as I said, first the Bharat will be printed because the Bharat is passed to the third constructor. So Bharat and his age is printed. Then it is going to the Lakhan one. Lakhan one means this one actually, basically, because this call is coming to this constructor actually. So this will be printed second, and the first constructor will be printed at last. So what will happen if I add this keyword, this call in a third constructor as well, or whether it is allowed? So let me do one thing. Let me add this keyword here as well, and let's see what happens. So what I'm doing, this, okay, and let's say test, and let me add age, okay, and let's understand. So if you observe now, it started giving an error because recursive constructor invocation. Suppose if it is allowed, then what will happen? This constructor chaining will go in an infinite loop, right? Like it will come here, then here, then here, then it will again matching to this second constructor, then it will go here, then it will call again this another constructor, third one, then third one will call second one. So that's how it is. See if it is highlighting these two only, if I change the parameter sequence, then it will start highlighting another one. So let me do like this. So if you see now, it started highlighting this all three, because this is calling to this first, then first is calling to second, then second is calling to this is again calling to first. So that's how this recursive chaining is happening here. That's why it is a rule that at least one constructor should be there without this keyword, so that the constructor chaining can be stopped here. Okay. So the second way will be constructor chaining with super keyword. Constructor chaining occurs through inheritance. When we say super keyword, a subclass constructor task is to call class constructor first. Okay, so as we already said that we need to write down super keyword as a first in the constructor. That's why it is saying that when you create an object of subclass, it will come to subclass constructor, but it will find super keyword as a first line. Then it will go to the super, that is parent class constructor. That's why it is written that a subclass constructor task is to call super class constructor first. So it will call super class constructor first. This ensures that creation of subclass object starts with the initialization of the data members of the superclass. So yeah, like as soon as you are creating an object of subclass, it will come to some obviously subclass constructor, but as soon as it comes to subclass constructor, it straight away goes to the superclass constructor, that is parent class constructor, and it will start initializing the data members of the superclass first. There could be any number of classes in inheritance chain. So yeah, the chain could be multi-level. So we know that Java supports multi-level inheritance. So there could be a multi-level chain inheritance change. Every constructor calls up the chain till class at the top is reached. So this constructor chaining will happen until we are at the top level class. That is the we can say grandfather of father, the most top level class, we can say. Okay, so let's understand the second form of constructor chaining, that is with using super keyword, or let's understand the constructor chaining with inheritance. So what I have done, I have just created one other class with the name constructor chaining, and I am extending that with our earlier class constructor test. And in the constructor chaining class, I have created one constructor, parameterized constructor, as which will accept age and name, and I'm calling the super class constructor with super keyword age and name. And now once I call this, basically when we are creating an object of this constructor chaining class, it will come to here, and with the super keyword it will call this constructor, that is the first constructor. I have modified the sysouts as well so that it will be easy to understand. So this will come to this as the age and name, the sequence is like integer and string. Then similarly I have kept all these calls as well. So just to, let's run the constructor chaining now and understand what it prints. Okay, so if you observe now, it will be printing the same. So basically with this change, the only change is that with using this constructor, like subclass constructor, we are going to a parent class constructor. So that will be one level chain again, like starting with subclass constructor to parent level constructor, and in the parent level constructor the other chain is already there, which I have kept intact actually. So yeah, this is how the super keyword will work in constructor chaining. So let's understand some of the rules for constructor chaining in Java. So if you want to use constructor chaining in Java, you must follow the below rules. The rules are like the this and super statement must always be the first statement inside the constructor. So we already uh, discussed this. At least one constructor should be present in the class that has no this keyword inside it. This is also we discussed in the program, as I have shown that if you are writing the constructor with all constructor with having this keyword in every constructor, then it will go to infinite loop, and the program will start giving an error. So that's why this another rule, that we should have at least one constructor which doesn't have this keyword inside it. We can implement the constructor chaining in any order. Yeah, so because you can call constructor from, like, let's say there is no order, like this constructor should be called first or second or third. You can randomly call this, so the chaining could happen in any sequence actually. So we discussed too much about how the constructor chaining can work, so let's understand the need for constructor chaining. So I'll just read through the bullets. Constructor chaining in Java is used when we want to pass parameters through multiple different constructors using a single object. So basically when you want to create a single object and you want to get all the constructor called, you can use constructor chaining. Using constructor chaining, we can perform multiple tasks through a single constructor instead of writing each task in a single constructor. Okay, so basically you can create different tasks in a constructor, and you can chain those tasks in using a single object, we can say. Constructor chaining allows us to create a separate constructor for each task and make links or chains among them so as to increase the readability of the code. So the readability of the code can be increased. Suppose we do not perform chaining among constructors and they require a specific parameter, then we will need to initialize that parameter twice in each constructor. So we need to initialize twice in each constructor. Whenever you want to make changes in the parameter, you will have to make changes inside each constructor. So if you need to change some parameters, you definitely need to change the um, parameters inside the constructor as well, because as you are using the constructor chaining here. This is another topic we need to discuss about constructor, that is what is Java copy constructor, and it is also most of the time used asked in interview question actually. So let's understand. Copy constructor is the constructor which takes parameter as object of same class and copy each field of the class to the new object. Okay, so basically you are passing the parameter the object as a parameter for copying the constructor, so it will copy each field of the class to the new object. A copy constructor in Java is a special type of constructor that is used to create a new object using the existing object of a class that we have created previously. It's the similar. It creates a new object by initializing the object with the instance of the same class, right? So unlike C++, Java does not provide default copy constructor. Okay, so you need to create one. If you want to have copy constructor in your class, copy constructor is an alternative to clone method, we can say. So as discussed about what is copy constructor, let's understand it through the code. So what I have done in our existing constructor test class, I have created one more constructor which will accept the parameter as the object of the constructor test. So basically it will accepting object as a parameter. Okay, so now and then I have created one more object like this obj1, and basically this is for calling the second constructor. So now once the second constructor is called, as we are passing this object basically, so this obj object is having these two values with it. So basically this field will be copied over to this constructor as we discussed earlier, and then this will be printed with this statement actually. So the fields from the object of the first constructor or first object instance will be copied by the second copy constructor. This is a copy constructor basically, which is copying the object reference or object fields from the first object or first constructor to the second constructor. So if I run the code now, see it will come to first constructor because once this object is created, it will call the first constructor, this one, and the print statement will be printed with the values name, ram, and age 32. Now once the second object is created, as you are passing the first object as a parameter to the second, while creating the second object, it will come over to this copy constructor, and this will copy the fields from the first constructor like age and name, and it will print again. So this will print the copy of first constructor and the values. So that's how the copy constructor works here. So after copy constructor, let's understand the advantages of copy constructor in Java. Uh, Java copy constructor has several advantages, so we'll read through one by one. The first one, the copy constructor is easier to use when our class contains a complex object with several parameters. Okay. Then second one, whenever we want to add any field to our class, then we can do so just by changing the input to the constructor. So adding field is easier when we are using copy constructor. One of the most crucial importance of copy constructors is that there is no need for any typecasting. Okay, so we don't need to do any typecasting while as we are doing copy constructor here. Copy constructors allow us to change the fields declared as final. Yeah, right, because we can instantiate or initialize the variables, final variables in constructors. So copy constructors will allow us to change the fields declared as final. Using a copy constructor, we can have complete control over object creation, right? As we are using copy constructor, like the same object will be used to copy the data in another object, so we can control the object creation using copy constructor. So as we discussed in characteristics of constructor, so that characteristics will become the difference with the methods actually. So let's read through what are the difference in between constructor and method. This could be again asked in an interview, so we will just read through. So for constructor, name must be same as class name. That's one of the condition while declaring the constructor. But there is no such restrictions for method name, right? So method name could be anything. We don't need to write method name equal to class name. So that's for method. Then second difference is constructor is used to initialize an object. Okay, so basically constructor is used to initialize an object. Method is used to demonstrate the functionality of an object. So basically method will be called by using the object. So that's why we are saying method is used to demonstrate the functionality on object. So why we are creating the object? Because to call the methods. Then third difference will be constructors are invoked implicitly whenever an object is created. So as you have seen earlier programs, we never write we never return like object dot constructor name. We don't need to do that. Whenever you are creating an object, the constructor will implicitly invoke, so you don't need to explicitly access it. Methods are need to be invoked explicitly by using the object. So for methods, you need to write down object dot method name, then only the method name will be called. For constructor, it will be called automatically. The fourth difference will be, in case constructor is not present, a default constructor is provided by Java compiler. So we already have seen this, how Java adds the default constructor there. But in the case of method, no default method is provided as such. So there will be no default method provided by compiler. If you're not writing any method, that means there is no method. The fifth difference will be, constructor does not return any value. Okay, so when we say it does not return any value, that means it doesn't have even any return type, not even void as well. But method definitely has the return type. It could be void. So if it is void, that means it is not returning any value, but the return type is must for method. And it could be any return type like integer, string, or whatever data type you want to return. You can write down the return type for the method. Then sixth difference will be, an interface cannot have the constructor, whereas we all know that interface can have the methods, but those method mostly be abstract methods actually. Then the seventh difference will be, can constructors cannot be private, but we all know that methods can be private, means you can write method as private. Then the eighth difference will be, constructor cannot be abstract, static, final, native, strict FP, or synchronized. Whereas methods can be all of this. You can write down method as abstract or static or final, right? So that will be the eight major differences in between constructor and method. Uh, yeah, that's it. So that will be all for this session, guys. Thank you very much. So as usual, if you have any queries, concerns, you can drop me an email mentioned over the screen. You can also like, comment, and share, subscribe. Thank you.